Simone Donaldson is the CEO, founder, registered social worker, psychotherapist, and principal consultant of a group practice called Agapé Lens Consulting and Therapy. I'm loving that name because agape means love. She has devoted over 15 years to racialized communities and mental health. Simone has been featured in multiple media outlets as a mental health and anti racist expert, including, listen up, folks, Elle Magazine, Yahoo Mail, and a documentary selected for the 2022 Toronto Film Festival. I'm giving you your flowers, and I'm not even finished reading the bio, but I'm giving you the flowers, my girl. Simone is also an author in the groundbreaking Canadian text Afrocentric Social Work. She is a highly sought after corporate consultant and has worked with many organizations to bridge the gap between equity and wellness concerns. Her consultations consist of executive leadership coaching, anti racism training, workplace wellness, and team consultations. In recognition that safe and sacred spaces are lacking, yes, for Black communities to thrive, heal, and find joy, she has been in demand for her transformative Black healing circles, purposely named There Is More. I want to get to one of those. Simone's purpose is to support all her clients to see sustainable change while guiding them patiently and safely towards authenticity so they may heal, thrive, and live out their purpose. Today, Simone is bringing You Were Not Meant to Do Life Alone. Simone, I'm excited. We're excited for you. And I know you came from one event to this event. So thank you for getting here. Thank you for saying yes to us. And I'm turning this mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, could we please give a hand to, yes, thank you, Natasha. Hey, Natasha. Listen, first of all, I'm excited to be on this panel with these two lovely women and Nicole. I don't know Nicole just yet, but it looks like we're going to be besties soon. But I want to actually just take a moment to thank both Michelle and Natasha. So they are sisters in the field, and they have both supported me personally and professionally at many different times. And in the spirit of what we are talking about today, sisterhood, Black sisterhood specifically, is so very important. And so, first and foremost, I want to thank you ladies for being in my corner and many different times in my life. Right, it's just so important that we really big up and love on our people. So thank you, ladies, for for the love that you've shown me. And Nicole, I know it's gonna be on and popping with us too just now. So, as mentioned, my name is Simone Donaldson. I am the CEO founder of Agapé Lens. And as Nicole had mentioned, agape does mean love, the highest form of love, God's love, unconditional love. And I was very purposeful in naming it as such. It was actually, I would say, something that was inspired. And I did put the exante go on it just to make it a little sexier, but agape truly, from the bottom of my heart, is the cornerstone of what Agapé Lens is about. And today, my hope is to share with you all my heart, as well as this framework that really is the cornerstone of what Agapé Lens is about. You know, for me, relationships are just so central to who we are. And unfortunately, it's often the area that has brought us the most pain, but also the area that often makes the best transformation, especially in our wellness. And so I am going to share a bit about that today. So, again, the topic here is You Are Not Meant to Do Life Alone. And I'm going to be introducing us to the Love Lens framework, which is this framework that I use both in my daily and professional life, because I truly do believe our relationships are our strongest healing tool. So I unfortunately wasn't able to hear all of Natasha's amazing presentation, but I did catch the end of it, and there was a lot of reference to it. And so I'm sure she went over what mindset is already, and so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But I think it's important that when we are thinking of mindset and we're thinking of relationships, that we think about the ways in which we are fixed in the way we see relationships, in the way we show up in relationships, in the ways in which we create barriers and parameters that actually don't allow us to flourish in relationships, versus maybe a growth mindset where we recognize that change is actually necessary and a part of our relational experience. And it's a good thing. It's a very, very good thing. And so when we look at a relational mindset, so I'm just going to move this thing over here the way. It keeps its doors wide open to change being a good thing, even if it's a scary thing. And let's be real, sometimes the scariest thing to do is to show up in relationships as our authentic self, to show up in relationships even when someone has done us wrong, right? And to show up in relationships so that there could be some level of transformation for us to feel good. It's sometimes the hardest experience that we'll have on this earth. But similar to a growth mindset, a relational mindset understands nothing is perfect. And conflict in relationships is an opportunity for closeness and inclusivity. That means that we're not just thinking about ourselves, but we're also thinking about the person that we're in relation to. And that this is being led by compassion and or love, like we're speaking of, to see our relationships flourish. And so this mindset of relational mindset is about really creating opportunities for folks to grow in these relationships and to show love and compassion, because the truth is none of us in here are perfect. Please name me one. If you know one perfect person, please name them for me. Right? None of us. All of us have been a villain in someone's story, right? And all of us, thankfully, hopefully, have been a helping hand to someone as well, right? And so how do we marry these two experiences? Because they're very true and real. I think it's really important when we talk about relational mindset or just relationships in general, that we recognize that, you know, we are in a world that has really shifted the way in which we see relationships, but also there are some real experiences that have influenced the way that we show up in them and or don't show up in them. And I want to cover a few that I think is really important for us to keep top of mind when we think about our relationships currently, right? And how we're showing up. This is not about judgment, right? Because I think we all fall, you know, we all succumb to the ways in which, for instance, Western society has pushed the agenda of individualism. We get caught in the idea that, you know, we are to put ourselves first. And of course, I do not think that that is a bad thing. I also believe at the same time that when we're only concerned about ourselves, then we are missing the point, right? If nothing else, the purpose of us being here is to nurture humanity. And in nurturing humanity means that sometimes we also have to think about others and not just ourselves. So Western society really emphasizes this idea of individualism. I could do it on my own. I should do it on my own, right? Even when we think about healing, you know, we hear a lot about self-care, right? Self-love, self-sufficiency. And again, innately, these things aren't horrible. They're not bad, right? But if that is the only space we're living in, then we so easily discount those that are around us who may need our support or who we may need to ensure that we're also well. As Black women specifically, we have to recognize that racial trauma is real. Racial trauma is real. Unfortunately, so many of us, you know, are living in survival mode. And what racial trauma has done, and for those who don't know much about racial trauma, essentially, it is having a variety of experiences, whether it's institutionally, systemically, individually, that we've experienced some kind of a harm based on our race. And because we live in a country that has unfortunately embedded levels of racism in everything that we do, sometimes we ourselves don't recognize it. And there's also this legacy of racial trauma that has yet to find healing oftentimes. And so that legacy also follows us and we stay in survival mode. And the truth is, at the root of survival mode is fear. The root of survival mode means that I'm going to stay in this box that either people have told me that I'm supposed to be in, or I'm going to stay in this box that I think is going to keep me the most safe. And believe it or not, the strong Black woman, superwoman schema is a part of that reality. Now tell me, who is tired of being strong? For the Black women that are here today, who is tired of being strong? You know, I think in many ways there is something to honor about us and who we are and the ways that we have been able to get through really difficult experiences going from the days of slavery onwards. Those things are to be honored, 100%. And at the same time, we were also supposed to live a life where we're thriving and not just surviving. So Dr. Cheryl Woods Giscombe had created and coined the term superwoman schema. And she did research around, you know, how Black women often show up as a result of racial trauma, as a result of our very unique experiences, and the things, the characteristics that we often take on as Black women, which of course prevents us from being as well as we can be. And so some things that are part of this characteristic is that we present an image of strength, right? We suppress our emotions, which means if we're not feeling them, then we're not talking about them. And we're probably getting more ill in our bodies, right? Resistance to being vulnerable. And if we're not being vulnerable, then we're not actually connecting with people. A drive to succeed despite limited resources. And again, this is a part of our maybe characteristics that can be positive to some way, in some way, but we all know that even when you get to the top, even when you succeed, right? There's these experiences that sometimes taunt us, right? Because we've had to be strong this whole time. And this is why we hear so many of our women that are unfortunately unliving themselves, right? And or are suffering in silence. And if we want to get well, we need to be vocal about what's not well. And then there's the obligation to help others, right? We're always the last one to get fed, always the last one that folks are thinking about. And we ourselves prevent ourselves from, you know, getting the support that we need. And so I want folks to even take a second to think about this strong woman narrative and think about how do you possibly hold on to this narrative, hold on to this identity for yourself? And how is it serving you or not? How is it serving your wellness specifically? And then I want to talk about relational hierarchy and culture, right? Because I think when we talk about relationships and we see, you know, in our culture, people are so quick to cut people off, not have conversations. But often you see this with friendships and not as much with romantic relationships, right? There's like this hierarchy of who gets to do me wrong more than the other, right? And why is that? Is it culture? Is it religion? Is it society? Right? There's often this like obligation to either our families or romantic partners, but our friendships, which to me it's the best template that we actually have in understanding ourselves, in understanding love, in being able to practice vulnerability. But yet friendships are often seen at the bottom of the totem pole, right? And then we have these ideas around culture that blood is thicker than water. But what if that blood is abusing you, right? Or what about all the secrets in the house that we often hold on to that is killing us, right? How about that? And then, of course, social media. Social media has become this frenzy that has begun to teach people things about wellness and about relationships and about ourselves that really often is incorrect. You know, I even think about like the term boundaries. Oh my gosh, the overkill on boundaries is real. And what I notice is that a lot of times when people talk about boundaries, it's still so self-serving. And if we understand boundaries, and again, I'm not talking about with abusive people and people that really are creating chaos in their life, right? But if we understand the root of boundaries, the meaning behind it really is to help us to create parameters so that we can be in a relationship better, not so that we are distancing ourselves. right? Boundaries are meant to keep us well, not to push people away. And if we want people to be connected in our wellness, then the way that we present our boundaries should also reflect that. But oftentimes the presentation is very self-serving. So we have to be very mindful of the ways in which we are being impacted, because some of it is through hurt and pain, like racial trauma, and some of it is just the influences. And I want folks to even think back. I know some of us here are born in Canada, but I'm sure there's a lot of us that are born outside of that. And either way, I want us to think about our communities and our culture and the ways in which community has truly been like the backbone to our survival and to how we've thrived. And it's important that we don't forget those things. Healthy bonds truly are our strongest healing tool. And I want to share some things that really prove that very fact. We as people from the African diaspora have consistently relied on community to be the ways in which we move forward, to be the ways in which we present well, to get the support that we need. And again, along the way, sometimes we've forgotten some of the ancestral wisdom and skill and knowledge that has really actually kept us alive and well and resilient, right? And even though there's parts of that of course require healing as well, there's parts of it that we could absolutely take with us in today. So these two symbols here are called Sankofa. Sankofa is a concept from the West African and African diaspora, which emphasizes reconnection to our African roots, right? And I want us to think about, when we think about our African roots, so you might be from the Caribbean. So even if you want to say Caribbean roots, because I know people connect with these things a little differently, I want you to think about the roots. I want you to think about the ways in which you've sat in Black joy. You've sat in Black wisdom. You've sat in Black knowledge and what that's done for you, right? I want to think about the ways in which community has been healing to you over the years. This concept Ubuntu, which is also something I hold very dearly. It says, I am because we are. It's an African principle. And this once again speaks to our humanity, this understanding that we are interconnected, that your pain is my pain, right? When you cry, I cry. And then we, of course, have the it takes a village to raise a child, a very infamous African proverb as well, right? And I think it's so important that we all remember that at times we need to be that village and at times we need to be that child. We need people to pour into us at times and we need to be able to lean on others at other times or allow them to pour into us, right? And I remember talking to an elder one time and he said, we got it wrong. It's not just it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a healthy village to raise a healthy child. And I think it is so important. And I mean, that stuck with me for so long, because the truth is, if we are not well as a people, then what we're passing down also may not be the greatest thing. It may not be healthy either. And again, if we understand intergenerational trauma, if we understand racial trauma, we understand that that legacy of not being healed often actually does create a level of sickness in us. And again, these things are because we're trying to adapt to a world that is constantly rejecting us because of both our race as well as our gender. And I think even when I think about this wellness revolution, it said conscious mind and conscious something else. Sorry, I forgot the part. But the point I want to make here is that consciousness means there's an intention in being well. There's an intention in getting well. And we have to. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Right? And so I think it's so important that we remember this ancestral wisdom and knowledge and skills that we have always held as a way to keep us well as a people. Right? And then we have the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's very old school stuff in psychology. But what we see here is that our basic needs, right? Our food, water, warmth, and rest, in terms of us getting well, seeing our full potential, feeling whole. And right above that is safety and security. And guess what? Guess where we get safety and security? We get that by the relationships that we have in our life. We get that by our environment, right? The ways in which we are nurtured. And then right above that, of course, is belongingness and love needs. Our intimate relationships, our friends. You see that it says friends there, guys? It's so important that we acknowledge that this thing around relationship is so integral, once again, to our wellness. And it's not something that's to be forgotten. Because the truth is, the people that are closest to us that mean us well, hopefully also want us to be well, and they will see the things that sometimes we don't see and show for us the way in which we need to be supported. And then last but not least, of course, you know, as a therapist, I have to talk about the individuals who often talk about relationship. And this is, you know, I know Natasha and Michelle could both attest to this, but we know that in psychology as well, you know, when people really excel in their wellness, it's because of the community that they have around them. It's because of the relationship that they're able to cultivate inside the therapy room as well as outside of it, right? So Susan Johnson, she is an EFT, emotion focused therapy therapist, and she really dives into attachment. And so this is the ways in which we relate to our, you know, the security that we feel, the safety that we feel, the ways we show up in relationships as a result of how we have been nurtured as young people. And she says in her book, and again, in many studies, you will see that the research is very consistent in stating that we are first and foremost social, relational, and bonding species. We are wired for connection, which means we cannot do without it. We cannot, right? This is not just a want, it's actually a need, right? And then Bessel van der Kolk, for those who don't know, he wrote the infamous book, The Body Keeps the Score, and he talks a lot about trauma, right? And the ways in which it impacts us. And once again, in his conclusions, he says being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. So we cannot take people for granted, whether we are experiencing trauma or not. It's actually a requirement for our wellness. And then again, regardless of treatment used in therapy, the evidence is strong in recognizing the therapeutic alliance as experienced by a client is a significant predictor of positive outcomes. So when we as therapists are building rapport with our clients, it makes such a difference on how they're able to show up, how they feel safe, secure, right? And how they're able to move through this journey, recognizing that it's not this power dynamic or that it's about, you know, me being the expert. No, we journey with our clients because we recognize the importance of building that relationship and what that does to both their brain, their body, their mind, their emotions, which is so crucial to their well-being. And so I want to introduce folks to the Love Lens framework. Again, this is at the cornerstone of Agapé Lens. It is how I maneuver both my practice and personal life. And of course, because I'm human, once again, there's no way I'm going to be perfect in this, but this is the way in which I intentionally move through life because I recognize the importance of us connecting as people being what's going to keep us well. It's going to be what brings us through hardship. And I'm very much convicted in it. And I want for folks to think about even the way that they were grown, maybe they went to church or, you know, you have another religion. You will see all these religions talk consistently even about the ways in which we love one another and how important that is, right? Think of love thy neighbor as thyself. You know, these are the things that have inspired the Love Lens framework. So the Love Lens framework prioritizes repairing relationships to oneself and others to achieve wholeness and unity where wounds have been created in great hardship. This framework stands on 4 pillars, which include self-awareness, stewardship, belonging, and reconciliation. You know, the truest depths of love manifest as a humanitarian call to action. And I'm going to repeat that again, because I think that when people hear the word love, they only think about the emotion that comes up with, you know, this word love. But there's so much action. And in fact, that is integral to what we could truly call love. It's recognizing that in conflict, the way we show up through the lens of love is what's going to help us create unity and bonding instead of disconnection. So again, the truest depths of love manifest as a humanitarian call to action that allows us to show up as ourselves and others with care, show up for ourselves and others with care, curiosity, and accountability during difficult times. So the love lens, again, was born as a call to action in utilizing true strengths of love to address individual and collective challenges. And I'm going to go through each one, and I've left questions on the screen because I want folks to begin to start thinking about, well, how can I start developing this better relationship both to myself as well as to those around me? Because the truth is, if we're not able to develop that relationship with ourselves, already we've put ourselves in a predicament where we're likely to have unhealthy relationships and we're likely to not be well. So as imperfect beings, it's essential to understand how we show up in this world through understanding our strengths and areas that require more growth. So, Michelle had spoken about the beginner's mind, and automatically what I thought about was what I call often the intentional stillness time. How many of you ladies have taken 5 minutes, 10 minutes to sit with yourself, to understand and trust your thoughts and trust your feelings? Because once again, as Black individuals, we are often questioned in the things that we feel, that we know maybe we're racist, in the things that we heard and we were impacted by it. And we're made to feel, oh, maybe you're overreacting, you're being too sensitive, right? Or sometimes because of this strong Black woman narrative, we dismiss the feelings that truly do hurt, the experiences that truly do hurt, and then refuse to be vulnerable about it so that people truly understand where we're at and so that we could truly create healthy boundaries that could reconnect us. So one thing I want folks to ask themselves is, how might the strong Black woman schema be getting in the way of you seeking or receiving help from loved ones? And once again, I think when we're talking about self-awareness and where we're at, I want folks to again maneuver this with love and self-compassion, because we're all trying to figure it out. None of us have it all figured out. No, not even the therapists out here, right? But how are we able to show up for ourselves in true love? The second one is stewardship. Again, we're wired for connection, and I truly believe we have responsibility to nurture the relationships in our lives, right? I think that, again, if we don't see that we have a responsibility to one another, then it's so easy for us to get swooped into this westernized way of seeing ourselves in this world, which is very individual and very self-serving. And so how are we intentionally showing up for one another to ensure that we're well? And how are we allowing them to do that for us? And again, this takes intention. So another challenge for folks is, I want you to intentionally deepen your check-ins with one very close person, because what I've seen people do all the time is say, hey, how are you doing, through a text message, and that's it, and then you move on with your life. And most people, they actually need a minute. They need space to be held for them to really understand what's going on underneath all of just what's going on in general, right? Because the truth is, a lot of us, the quick automatic response is, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. But how many of us are really fine and okay in those moments? And the truth is, sometimes we don't even realize that we're not okay because we don't pause, right? Because we don't sit with ourselves. And so I want folks to be intentional about maybe finding just one person that's close to them and consider doing it with, that person that is the strong one in your friend group or in your family group or whatever it is. Because often those are the people that are hiding the most amount of pain. And this is actually something that I do with one of my dear friends. Once a week, we connect with each other over the phone and we share our wins of the week. And automatically, and we share about our personal life as well as our professional life. And it's really important for us to do that because, again, we're there to support one another. And let me tell you, like, even just taking the pause for myself to say, oh yeah, like I actually did really good. I feel proud of myself for that. Like how often are we celebrating ourselves? We're not doing it enough. And it takes intention to do these things, to understand where we're at. And when we don't have that awareness, then how do we get the support that we need? Right? And how do we then show up for others? Because we often don't know how to, but it's because we don't have the information to do that. So intention around showing up for those in your life. I want folks to think about that and steward the relationships. Belonging, creating a space for all to feel heard and valued and seen. It increases safety and security as a result and enhances one's ability to show up authentically. And once again, I'm going to go back to this idea of racial trauma because it's very real for a lot of us, right? Sometimes we are going to work and we're feeling what often is called imposter syndrome, which I would actually say is internalized racism. And we feel as though we're so alone in the workplace. We don't feel safe or secure there, right? And often we don't want to rely on, obviously, our colleagues to do that. And this is why, once again, we need to be able to rely on somebody that's going to allow us to feel safe and secure. We need each other to navigate this world. We're not supposed to do it alone, and we absolutely cannot do it alone with the level of systemic racism that we're experiencing daily. So how are you intentionally making sure that people feel safe and secure and seen? And again, I'm not telling you to do this for everybody, but my hope is that you at least have one person in your life that you could begin to cultivate this type of relationship with if you haven't already, and allow them to do the same for you. So what I want folks to maybe try is think about one person you would like to improve your relationship with, but you have been struggling to figure out how. Complete the love language quiz together and talk about it. And I've done this with my clients many times as well. And it's always such a beautiful experience for folks, because I think when people think of the love language test and they think about their own results, they think, oh, well, this is the way I should be treating other people. But no, we need to treat people the way that they need to be loved, because even underneath that whole love language is experiences that informs people of what they need, right? And you don't know that. You don't know that unless you ask questions, unless you try to figure that out on your own in some kind of way. And so this is a really great way, a fun way to do it. And then be intentional in showing up in that way for these folks. And these could be in very small ways, it could be in big ways, but I think the intention is the main thing. And last but certainly not least is reconciliation. And this, again, is probably one of the hardest parts, right? Because when someone has done us wrong, and again, I'm not talking about abuse in this context necessarily, or, things that are experiences that are extremely toxic. I'm talking about those that are in your life. Again, we have a culture that likes to cut people off, that says good vibes only, when who the heck is good vibes all the time? I don't know who is. And if you are, then, no comment, but I'm glad for you maybe. But reconciliation, I want us to think, right? Like, positive transformations can be birthed out of conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing. It's an opportunity for learning, and it's an opportunity to bond. It's an opportunity to hear and understand the other person, right? So it's birthed out of conflict if we are committed to learn, grow, forgive, and repair in difficult times. And again, this has to be with intention. If you go with a heart of reconciliation into conflict, then your posture, your heart posture, your mind, your brain, I mean, listen, people get triggered again, of course, nothing's going to be perfect. But when you go with this lens, you go with this love lens into conflict with the hopes to learn something about the other person, to listen to what they're saying, and with this idea that we want to reconnect in a positive way, then your chances are much, much higher in terms of this becoming something that grows your relationship and teaches you something about you. And I want folks to think about the last time they maybe had a conflict with a friend, and when they were able to talk it out, and like, didn't you become much closer after that? It broke like these serious like boundaries and parameters in your life, because there was a level of trust and security that was built there, a knowing, an understanding, safety. And these are the things that we want to really consider when we are in conflict, that we actually need each other. And of course, we're going to hurt each other at some point in time, unfortunately, but it doesn't mean we should give up on one another, right? Because we truly do need folks in our lives, good people in our lives, to stay well and to get well. So the last challenge, I guess, is for folks to think of anyone in their life that they recently cut off, or in the last few years, because you cut them off because you weren't able to sit in that place of vulnerability with them. Like you weren't able to tell them that you hurt me, that you offended me. And instead, you decided to just distance yourself and say, oh, this person is this way. And you really never gave them or yourself an opportunity to grow in this relationship, right? So I want for folks to think about maybe just one person and maybe write a letter just to kind of help you move through some of those emotions and then talk to them about it. And if you can't think of somebody, I want you to think about yourself. Maybe you need to write a forgiveness letter or a reconciliation letter to yourself. Because sometimes the relationship that we are so much more critical of is the one that we have with ourselves. And when we don't know how to love on ourselves well, when we don't know how to forgive ourselves well, when we don't allow ourselves to make mistakes, then it's so much harder for us to allow others to do that in life too. And so that transparency and vulnerability with ourselves is just as important so that we also are giving ourselves that level of love and care that is necessary to stay well and to get well. And that is all for today. Did I make it on time?
You made it.
Yeah.
And everything's on time today because you know what? From the comments in the chat, you are on time, Simone.
Yeah.
You missed our first session, and let me tell you, we talked about the strong woman, and it came up in the comments. So for you to bring up this piece right here, it speaks to the synchronicity, the synergy of the day, and how things are flowing. And I know as you were talking, you probably couldn't even see all the comments in the chat. They were flying in like, I don't know, like rockets, you know, and loving the framework. And I think it really stimulated how people are seeing life, how they're thinking, how they're loving, the way that you presented love. And I'll let you look through the chat when we're on a little in the next little session. We're almost done, folks. Can you believe it's almost 5 o'clock? I can't believe it's
I
almost.
know.
We're gonna do one question out of the questions because we're trying to be done at 5. I think we may go over. Guys, can you give us 10 minutes after 5? Maybe we may finish 10 minutes after 5. Let's see how we do. Okay,
Yes.
so
Yes.
here's the question, and it's a big question.
Okay.
So you got like a minute or two to answer this big question. How
Okay.
do we get our family to open up and be willing to ask about mental wellness about each other?
How do we say, could you repeat that one more time, please?
How do we get our family to open up about being willing to talk about their mental wellness with each other? So how would you and I as sisters talk to each other about our mental health and wellness? Because now we're sisters, Simone.
Yeah, well, yes, we are. Absolutely. I mean, there's many ways to go about this, and I think it's a very complex, it's a very big question because the truth is we're so complex as people and families. We know families are very, very complex. And I think that if you are the individual who is maybe ready to start sharing, then that's the place that you do it. I don't think that forcing people into having the conversations makes sense, but easing them into those conversations might be very helpful. And even simple ways like watching a show and, saying, I've felt that one time. I felt this anxiety, or I felt like, I just was at my loose end and I didn't really know what to do. And saying to the person in your home, have you ever felt this way? What was that like? What did you guys do about it? Right? And being able to provide like your own vulnerability once again for people to know that it's okay to speak on these things and to explore these things, that's just one way that I might go about it. I do think that so many people are resistant to talking about their feelings, especially in the Black community, because we're afraid of what might happen, especially as Black women, right? We're afraid of what might happen if we go there. Right. And I know so many people, even in my family, who we've tried to talk about things that were quite sensitive, and they just run away, or they get upset and they cut it off and move on. And so I think the number one thing really is to just ease your way into these conversations and finding little opportunities. And again, it doesn't have to be this big production of a conversation. It could just be that one moment and saying, oh, look how this person is feeling so sad and or whatever. What did you used to do when you were younger and you were feeling sad? What happened there, right? And sharing these stories and maybe starting to open up people to this idea that yeah, we all get sad and there's nothing wrong with it. And also when we get sad, these are the different things that can happen. You know, I think a lot of people in our generation are going to be the cycle breakers of this mental wellness thing. And it's a tall task to take on. And I think that it's necessary. But we do need to also be patient with folks who have never really explored these areas.
I love it. And that was a really great answer to a very complex question.
Yeah,
And
thank you.